West Memphis 3, satanic ritual or something else? The West Memphis Three are three men convicted as teenagers in 1994 of the 1993 murders of three boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. Damien Echols was sentenced to death, Jessie Misskelley Jr. to life imprisonment plus two 20-year sentences, and Jason Baldwin to life imprisonment. During the trial, the prosecution asserted that the juveniles killed the children as part of a satanic ritual. Due to the dubious nature of the evidence, as well as the suspected presence of emotional bias in court, the case generated widespread controversy and was the subject of several documentaries. Celebrities and musicians helped fundraisers to support efforts to free the men. In July 2007, new forensic evidence was presented. A report jointly issued by the state and the defense team stated, although most of the genetic material recovered from the scene was attributable to the victims of the offenses, some of it cannot be attributed to either the victims or the defendants. Following a 2010 decision by the Arkansas Supreme Court regarding newly produced DNA evidence and potential juror misconduct, the West Memphis Three negotiated a plea bargain with prosecutors. On August 19, 2011, they entered Alford pleas, which allowed them to assert their innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors have enough evidence to convict them. Judge David Laser accepted the pleas and sentenced the three to time served. They were released with 10-year suspended sentences, having served 18 years. All right, so here are the boys that were murdered. They were 8 years old, second graders. So this case study has been sponsored by Jane. Thank you, Jane, for sponsoring this case study. It was very eye-opening. I knew about the case before, and I always, wondered about like where the truth lies in this. But I did think that, Damien Echols and the other two were guilty simply because of the surface knowledge. But I never did extensive research into this story. So Jane wants to know, do you think the Memphis Three committed this crime? So I'm going to put my belief out there right now after doing extensive research on this case. No, I don't believe that these three young men committed the crime. I believe it was someone else who committed the crime. So we'll get into that. And I might as well get it out the way now because my assessment is basically showing how Damien Echols in particular, because he's the main character in this, is not guilty of the crime that he was convicted of. So you said, was there anything significant about Damien's natal and or transit chart that helped him to be released after 17 years? So I'll get into that. What are the markers for Satanism in a person's chart? So I'll get into that right now. So basically with that, you want to see a prominent Saturn. So a lot of times if Saturn is dignified, especially in Capricorn, Saturn being on the ascendant or in the first house, because that's showing what you identify as. Saturn on the midheaven even. Saturn conjunct sun or moon. Scorpio placements, Sagittarius placements, especially if Sagittarius is afflicting a planet in Pisces, such as sun or moon in Sagittarius square Saturn in Pisces. Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces placements, either the Capricorn North Node or Capricorn South Node. Sun square Saturn, that's like being satanic by default or de facto Satanism, you could say, where they're not purposely trying to be a Satanist, but their character is very satanic. Mars conjunct Saturn. Sun, Moon, or Mercury in aspect with Neptune. 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th house placements. Having a planet in Gemini or being a Gemini rising helps because Gemini is an immoral sign. Aries helps as well because focus on the self, that's basically the essence of Satanism. All right, so again, I'm placing most of the emphasis on Damien Echols because he's the most prominent one out of the Memphis Three, the West Memphis Three. So here's his chart right here. As you can see, he's a Sagittarius born December 11th, 1974. He has this big old Sagittarius stellium, Venus, Sun, Mercury, Neptune, North Node, Mars, all in Sagittarius, Moon in Scorpio, Uranus in Scorpio, Pluto in Libra, Saturn in Cancer, Gemini South Node, Chiron in Aries, Jupiter in Pisces. Now, he does have, like, that Jupiter in Pisces could translate into Satanism, but not all the time. That could just mean somebody that's very mystical, that's into magic, esoteric knowledge, all that, which he very much is. He's basically like a magician at this point in his life. He's a wizard. And people that are staunch Christians, they'll look at anybody that's into either witchcraft or magic, mysticism, esoteric knowledge, the occult in general, they'll automatically basically just characterize them as a Satanist. They'll be like, oh, you must worship Satan or whatever. Christians have come at me. I've gotten emails from time to time by Christians saying that what I'm doing is of the devil and I need to repent and all this stuff. So I get it where a person could be misjudged simply because of their belief system. All right, so here he is right here during his latter time being in prison. Birth number 11 breaks down to 2. This produces internal and external conflicts, interference from third parties. Also, this is about him telling his story. Life path number 8, punishment, time. And he was doing time. He did 18 years. And also the claims of Satanism, with 8 representing Saturn, which is another name for Satan. So he has a 6-point Sagittarius stellium with Mars, North Node, Neptune, Mercury, Sun, and Venus. So this places a strong emphasis upon religion and spirituality. So from a very young age, he was very much into spirituality, and he was practicing Wicca at the time that he became arrested. So again, we're dealing with people in the Bible Belt, people who are generally very Christian. So even like seeing somebody that's a Wiccan, and Wiccan has nothing, the Wicca has nothing to do with Satanism, but they'll lump it all together and say, oh, that's some satanic stuff. Sagittarius also deals with the truth. So the truth is a major theme in Damien Echols' life: justice, court system, trial, being judged, and freedom. So all of those themes came into play with this situation. Unfortunately, I don't have his birth time, so I can't get into his house placements. So Damien Echols, that's him on the right. So he has Mercury, Neptune, and North Node, opposition South Node in Gemini. This is basically representing him testifying in court. The influence from Neptune can be representative of being falsely accused or being the fall guy. It represents some of his mental health issues, especially the intrusive thoughts, not getting some of the facts straight. So Damien Echols did have some mental health issues, and a lot of it was dealing with like paranoia and stuff. He was on medication, and there were times during his testimony that he was like either mixing up the story or not getting certain facts straight and all that. So a lot of that's dealing with these oppositions right here. Influence from Neptune can be a sign of being heavily medicated. So it says right here, the only thing I'm asking Arkansas to do is to test the DNA. That's it. They don't even have to pay for it. We will. If they stick to the claim that I'm guilty, I'm giving them the chance to prove it. All they have to do is put their money where their mouth is, but they won't. Now, I don't know what year this was posted. Also with these oppositions, deals with this. During Echols' trial, Dr. George W. Woods testified that Echols suffered from serious mental illness characterized by grandiose and persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic incapacitating mood swings. So that Scorpio moon has a lot to do with his mental health issues too. But this opposition is basically describing the grandiose and persecutory delusions, the visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes. When you have a Gemini South Node, there could be some mental health issues that you're dealing with just off the gate. And then once you put Neptune in there, it's real easy to basically have hallucinations, visual and auditory. I don't know if you saw that one video I did. I forget who I was doing a video about, but I was talking about Sagittarius and how Sagittarius deals with the superconscious and how you can hear voices if you're tapped into that superconscious, basically intrusive thoughts. So Mercury, Neptune, North Node square Jupiter and Pisces. These squares were also responsible for some of his mental health issues as well, but it's also dealing with him being misunderstood. Main aspects that are representative of being falsely accused. I often say with Jupiter and Pisces, there's a high chance you could be falsely accused of wrongdoing or a crime at some point. Represents his incarceration and his struggle to regain his freedom, can produce a serious case of insomnia, can produce addictive tendencies, adverse effects of certain drugs, sorry, spelled effects wrong, lapses in judgment. So it was this square in particular that was made it easy for them to convict him. Mercury and Sun in Sagittarius, quincunx Saturn in Cancer. This can produce episodic depression, emotional outbursts, being sent upstate, basically going, you know, they always say upstate when you go into prison. A challenge with repeating his story in court. Parts of the story changes, could be due to memory lapses. So this type of situation could make it a hard time to order your thoughts and to maintain memory. Represents the strife between Damien and the families of the boys. Problems with going back to his hometown. He did go back to Arkansas at one point years later after he got out, but I'm not sure what became of that. But he didn't stay. He just visited. He currently lives in Salem, Massachusetts. And you know, Salem, that's where they had the Salem witch trials. Here he is right here. I believe that's his wife. And he's written like about 3 books. I'm thinking about getting one of his books. He's very much into magic, mysticism. He's also a Reiki practitioner. And again, just by looking at him, and this is why I thought I immediately assumed, oh yeah, he did it. He is Satanist, all this type of stuff. Look at him. But that's because I didn't ever put time and effort into researching his story. And when you research the story and then combine it with what's in his chart, you can clearly see that he was railroaded, him and the other two, that basically they didn't have what it takes to commit the crimes that were committed. But again, you know, you can't always judge a book by its cover. So somebody could see him looking like this, looking like some, and you know, he does kind of have a satanic look. I'm not even gonna lie. But this is also the look of occultists and wizards and magicians. And that doesn't mean that they're automatically Satanists. Even when you look at his tattoos, like on his fingers, those are runic symbols. And runes have nothing to do with Satanism. He also has a tattoo showing the I Ching, a hexagram of the I Ching, which I'm into. So again, somebody just looking at him could be like, oh yeah, he is Satanist for real. Same way I misjudged him when I was just looking at him just on the surface and saying, oh yeah, he especially when I started to see like some of these Hollywood types supporting his cause and trying to get him free, like Johnny Depp and stuff. I was like, oh yeah, he did it. But then, like I said, Jane, this was an eye opener because doing the research, I had to say, hold up, wait a minute. This ain't adding up. I don't think he really did it. Now, Mercury and Sun in Sagittarius trine Chiron in Aries. So this represents Damien being granted his freedom through an unusual plea deal, an exception being made. Represents that long beard. represents his name, Damien, which is infamous and synonymous with for a demon child. And Jane, you had even mentioned that, and I thought about that too. And I was like, damn. So yeah, he might have that demonic name, but I don't believe he actually committed those murders or the other two. But it's just interesting. This just shows you how life works out and how life is just strange like that. Becoming a published author of an award-winning book, undergoing a spiritual initiation. Mercury in Sagittarius, semi-square Uranus in Scorpio, represents Jessie Misskelley's betrayal, because what happened was they interrogated Jessie Misskelley, the one on the left, for hours upon hours. He was already dealing with a low IQ. And basically, he confessed to the murders. But then the next day, he recanted that confession. But they stuck to that. And that was how they really, that was like the nail in the coffin they needed to convict the three of them. And the crazy thing is, Jessie Misskelley, he was an associate of theirs. Like, they knew him, but they weren't really friends with him. So Damien and Jason were friends. They were tight, but they only really knew a Jessie through school. So it's interesting how they pulled Jessie in to get that conviction. And so, you know, Uranus rules friends, but it also just rules your acquaintances and your associates. And this is representing the betrayal. Prone to view the world through a dark lens, can produce mental instability, unsettled mind, ADHD-like symptoms. Also, conspirators pin the crime on him, being bullied. Jupiter in Pisces, quincunx Pluto in Libra. So this can represent trumped up charges, getting caught up in a botched investigation or a cover up, the appeals process while Damien was incarcerated, represents the Alford plea deal. The Alford plea is a legal mechanism that allows defendants to plead guilty while still asserting their actual innocence in cases where defendants can see that prosecutors have sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. So the quincunx deals with where you make a compromise. So unfortunately, they weren't just let go and said, oh, we're going to overturn this plea. They actually had to make the compromise and say, okay, we're going to plead guilty, but I think it was where they maintain their innocence, but they're saying that the prosecutors had enough evidence to convict them. That's some strange plea deal. But it basically shows you that the court system is admitting, yeah, we realize you didn't do it. Says here, we now have to file a response to the request that the case be dismissed. I'll keep everyone posted. The corruption around this case is incredibly deep. I believe every word he's saying. He says, I believe the person who carried out these murders worked for the West Memphis Police Department. I believe so too. This is why they fight so hard to keep it covered up. So Mars in Sagittarius, sesqui-square Saturn in Cancer. This is basically Damien identifying with a spiritual belief system that results in condemnation by the populace, a culture shock aspect. Also run-ins with the authorities. So he was already arrested before for, I think it was like burglary or something like that. You know, teenagers sometimes get into trouble and stuff. So the cops were already familiar with Damien. Going up against a biased, clannish police force. So remember, when I was reading the story, it says right here, due to the dubious nature of the evidence, as well as the suspected presence of emotional bias, that Saturn and Cancer, there's the emotional bias right there. Saturn is ruling the police force, the authorities, and Cancer is about that emotional bias. So it's showing up in his chart. Going up against a biased, clannish police force can be indicative of a witch hunt. This is basically a we don't like your kind or you're not welcome here aspect. It can play out as discrimination, prejudice due to one's beliefs. Can act out dark emotions, explains his dark exterior, his dark countenance. So Damien Echols, he tweeted this. He said the chief of police was not truthful. He has now resigned, and we know that none of the evidence was destroyed. It can now be tested to see who left DNA at the crime scene. My attorney was in the evidence room this morning and saw it with his own eyes. Every piece is still there. Interesting that the chief of police resigned. So Saturn and Cancer square Chiron and Aries. This is Damien not fitting in with the prevailing culture, sticking out like a sore thumb because, you know, he's dressing like in black and, you know, looking all Wiccan and stuff, being singled out. So this is basically Damien versus the state of Arkansas. And this can play out as domestic violence. I did read that he had a hard upbringing. Let me go to his story real quick. Damien Wayne Echols, born Michael Wayne Hutchinson, was on death row, locked down 23 hours per day at the Varner Unit Supermax. Echols entered the system on March 19, 1994. From prison in 1999, he married landscape architect Lori Davis. On August 19, 2011, Echols, along with Baldwin and Misskelley, was released from the prison after their attorneys and the judge. Wait a minute, I'm thinking that they were talking about his early life. Here we go, right here. Echols' mental stability during the years immediately prior to the murders and during his trial was the focus of his appellate legal team in their appeals attempts. In his efforts to win a new trial, Echols, 27 at the time of the appeal, claimed he was incompetent to stand trial because of a history of mental illness. The record on appeal spells out a long history of Echols' mental health problems, including a May 5th, 1992 Arkansas Department of Youth Services referral for possible mental illness, a year to the day before the murders. Hospital records for his treatment in Little Rock 11 months before the killings show a history of self-mutilation and assertions to hospital staff that he gained power by drinking blood, that he had inside him the spirit of a woman who had killed her husband. Oh, shit. I never read this part. There it is. Oh, wait till I get to this asteroid. Oh, that makes so much sense. I didn't even read this part. Wow. That he had inside him the spirit of a woman who had killed her husband and that he was having hallucinations. He was also told mental health workers that he was going to influence the world. All right, let me finish reading on. So he got that Scorpio moon. I'm not sure about the exact degree because I don't have his birth time, but that represents the tattoos, dark personality, dark turbulent emotions, a heavy emotional landscape. So these are general traits of the Scorpio moon. The bipolar moon, basically. The Scorpio moon is the bipolar moon. It's also the borderline personality moon, the personal demons moon, the psychotherapy moon. So a lot of people that have Scorpio moons will enter psychotherapy at some point in their life. Strong interest in the occult, a sense of futility. So there could have been times where he thought that, you know, there was no use trying to fight the system because that Scorpio energy can produce a sense of futility. And also where death is a major theme, being hated, despised, but also receiving support, like from the celebrities, resentment, vengeful. I'm sure he was probably doing some spells behind bars that might actually help get them out. So here's Damien with Johnny Depp. So again, through my bias, I was like, oh yeah, he did that shit. Look, he all with Johnny Depp and stuff. And we know Johnny Depp is dark. But I have to be honest. I was like, I really had to look at this from an objective lens and say, nah, Damien didn't do this. James Baldwin didn't do this. Jessie Misskelley didn't do this. They were framed. So Gemini South Node trine Pluto in Libra, Sagittarius North Node, and Neptune sextile Pluto in Libra. This is representing his book deal. Getting support and backing from some major artists in Hollywood and music industry like Johnny Depp. Represents the documentary Paradise Lost that helped to cast doubt in some people's minds regarding Damien's guilty conviction. So let's get into his asteroid. So Uranus conjoined to Hebe. This is Damien being associated with the children, his friend or associate Jessie Misskelley's testimony that pinned the murders on him. Venus opposition Nessus. He most likely knows who really did it because Nessus acts as the perpetrator, the abuser. Nessus can also be a rapist, what have you. This opposition is akin to facing the abuser / murderer in court. I believe he really knows who did it, but he's not saying. Sun conjunct Veritas. Veritas deals with the truth. So the truth comes out. Damien being vindicated, well, sort of, because he had to cop to that plea deal. Chiron opposition Sappho, being confined to men-only spaces. Jupiter parallel Dejanira could represent a blood pact or spells using blood, suicidal ideations, perhaps poison. Chiron contra parallel Dejanira, bloodletting, perhaps suicidal, rape, man destroyer, destroyer of one's husband. So that's what I flipped out about when I read this part. So let's go back to this, because Dejanira is basically a myth about a woman that killed her husband, and it's known as man destroyer. So let me just read this part again, dealing with these asteroids. So even the drinking the blood part too. So let me just read this part again. A year to the day before the murder, hospital records for his treatment in Little Rock 11 months before the killing show a history of self-mutilation, which is very Scorpio moon, and assertions to hospital staff that he gained power by drinking blood, because blood is a major theme of Dejanira, and that he had inside him the spirit of a woman who had killed her husband. That's Dejanira. I'm like, yo, I didn't even read that before. So I do have this quote in there, but I didn't see the part about the woman. I mean, he feeling like he had a woman inside him. So it says, at his death penalty sentencing hearing, Echols' psychologist reported that months before the murders, Echols had claimed that he obtained superpowers by drinking human blood. I'm just like, wow. Anyway, the chart doesn't lie. Moon conjunct Unocal High, that's a star that can manifest as insanity, accidents, writing, forgery, loss. Sun conjunct Mesim. This can manifest as dangerous passions. And him being into high ceremonial magic alone, that could be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Venus conjunct Etzimin. This can produce a fondness for solitude, dishonor, downfall, occult power, esoteric and philosophical studies. I'm sure he's into astrology. Venus conjunct Acumen, religious extremism, morbid outlook. Venus parallel Fasces. This can manifest as violent death, sickness, accidents, combative, broken limbs. With the violent death here, with the Venus in conjunct, parallel to that, that can represent the court case, the trial. Now, some people, again, they could just look at this and be like, well, look, he got the violent death in here. He probably did it. But you have to take the whole chart into account. So Mars is conjoined to Cornophoros. This is another aspect that can manifest as dangerous passions. And again, by no means am I saying, oh, Damien's an angel and stuff. He definitely is dealing with some very dark energy. But I don't believe he murdered those boys. I don't believe any of the Memphis 3 murdered those boys. Again, he got an Ankh symbol. He got runes, tattoos on his hand. That's Sawelo. That's Uruz right there. So that's what I mean. Like, and that's Pertho right there. That's what I mean. Like, to a Christian that doesn't know anything about this stuff, they would automatically be like, oh my God, he got the satanic tattoos. It's all that stuff is satanic. But no, you can't always judge a book by its cover. And actually, when you look at Damien's eyes, and my daughter was even saying this, and she had no idea about this story, but she was the one who first mentioned. She was like, you could see it in his eyes that he didn't do it. Like, he has very gentle eyes. So the eyes are the window to the soul. And when you look into his eyes, he just doesn't have those type of eyes where he would be depraved like that. He has more sadness behind the eyes than anything else. So Saturn is conjoined to the fixed star Wasat. This can manifest as poisons, violence, malevolence, destructiveness, pessimism. Neptune conjunct Antares, sudden loss, suspicious, violence. Pluto conjunct Vendomiatrix, witch hunts. There it is right there. And that's basically what Damien was saying, that this was a witch hunt. And I definitely believe that is. So this star shows up. Witch hunts. Falsity, disgrace, stealing, depression, mysticism, occult. South Node conjunct Aldebaran. Popularity, integrity, warmongering, agitation, danger, loss, violent death. Here he is with Henry Rollins. He's a rock singer. Uranus parallel Fortuna. So this represents his friends and associates who rally for his cause. An unexpected twist of fate or fortune. Making a fortune through being an occultist, with Uranus being in Scorpio. Okay, so I'm going to get into some of the aspects dealing with the synastry between Damien and the three boys. But before I do that, let me just say something real quick. When it comes to murder, and especially like the murder of a child, you're going to see certain aspects in the chart. You're going to see certain signs. Leo in particular, you'll see. And when you look at Damien's chart, he doesn't have any planets in Leo. Now, granted, he could be a Leo rising. We don't know. But usually if someone has murdered a child or children, you will see strong themes in that chart dealing with that. And looking at Damien's chart, I don't see none of that. I don't see, oh, this person could have killed a child. I don't see it. But when I get into this other chart, you'll see what I mean, where there, if you look at some charts, there are indicators of that. But more about that in a minute. But yeah, he doesn't have the chart of a child murderer. And neither does the other two as well. Out of the three, the one that has the most questionable chart is James Baldwin, but I still don't believe that he murdered those children either. Okay, so let's get into some of the aspects involving the synastry. I'm not going to discuss the whole synastry. I just selected aspects that really stand out. So Damien's Neptune and North Node conjoined to the boy's Uranus. Basically, Damien's overt displays of his spirituality made it easy to connect him to the boys. Injustice, lies used to connect Damien to the boys. Damien's Jupiter squares the boy's Uranus. Damien's claims of not being associated with the boys. So Damien and the other two boys basically said they didn't know of those boys. Also, the boys' teams of lawyers were able to attack Damien's spirituality as part of their defense. When I say the boys' teams, I'm talking about the victims. So the victims' lawyers were able to attack Damien's spirituality as part of their defense. So it says here, during the trial, the prosecution asserted that the juveniles killed the children as part of a satanic ritual. So once you hear that, and especially if it's happening in the Bible Belt, that's the nail, the final nail in the coffin. It's over. Yeah, that's what happened, especially considering how the boys were found. Damien's Jupiter squares the boys' Chiron and two of the boys' North Nodes. So represents Damien's claims that he didn't know those boys. Damien's claims that some of the information about his connection to the boys are lies. Like somebody had said that he had a jar of the boys' testicles in his house, which was like a total lie. There's a lot of sensationalism surrounding this case. A big portion of Damien's karmic debt had to be remitted through those boys. Basically, with Damien's South Node conjoined to the boys' Chiron and two of the boys' North Nodes, Damien's Neptune opposing the boys' Chiron and nodes. Damien's Neptune and North Node. So with this, it's showing that, yes, Damien was dealing with some heavy karma from his past life, and it came through those boys. So even though I don't believe he murdered those boys, he still had to pay back some karmic debt, and it had to occur through those boys. Now, while it could connect Damien with the boys' bikes, with Gemini ruling bikes, these conjunctions can mean that Damien was a victim of duplicity and outright lies. Damien's serious mental health issues and challenges with communication made for an easy conviction. Damien's Uranus conjunct the boys' Plutos. Being associated with the boy's death, especially due to Damien's acquaintance's omission. Again, Jessie Misskelley, under heavy interrogation, he was being interrogated for hours and hours. And when they do that, sometimes you could break a person down, especially a person that's not, that's already dealing with a low IQ, and get them to admit just so they can leave you alone. It's like torture. But then the very next day, he recanted that confession. Damien's Venus conjunct the boys' Neptunes, having to view the photos of the boys in court, being attached to their victimization, people believing it was a sacrifice. So now let's get into the transits that occurred on the day of the murder. So if Damien did kill those boys along with the two others, you would see transits dealing with that. Also, here's Jessie Misskelley's chart. I'll get into the transits in a minute, but there's aspects in his chart that could show where he is very impressionable. So he has Mars, quincunx Neptune, which can cause him to basically get scared to the point where he will cop to something, basically. And it was something else he had too that was pointing to that. That Mercury, quincunx, Scorpio, North Node, that's basically the interrogation right there that caused him to make that confession. But then with the quincunx, that's him going back, backtracking and saying, no, I recant what I said. And then just being a Cancer, Cancer is all about self-preservation. So, that alone can explain why he was like, okay, I'll cop to it just so they can leave me alone. And he's not thinking about Damien and James and how it's going to affect them at the time. Here's Jason's chart. Like I was saying, Jason has the aspect where you could say, okay, that is a bit sketch. But then again, maybe not. He has Uranus square Saturn and Leo, and that can deal with the sudden death of a child, murder of a child, but that doesn't mean that he did it. And then Mars square Neptune, that can produce somebody that is either seriously drug addicted or where they're just dealing with some serious issues with their identity. But that's also an aspect that could deal with being falsely accused and being sent to prison even though you didn't do it. That Pisces is something else, because remember I said Jupiter and Pisces could deal with being falsely accused, but so can Mars and Pisces. So some of the transits, the main transits that he had going on that day, Neptune and Capricorn square Chiron and Aries. So these excerpts are taken from my book on transits. I know I keep talking about I'm going to finish the book this year. I actually am. So stay tuned for that. I might not be able to get it published until next year, though. But this is some of what's in my book based on this aspect. And a lot of it applies to Damien. Being aware of a conspiracy, victimization, rumors are spread about you, a secret is exposed, being involved in a scandal, a need to come to terms with an addiction, feeling isolated, being ridiculed, being jeered, being guilty by association, succumbing to peer pressure, being a wallflower, feeling out of place, discrimination or prejudice, dealing with cliquish people, falling victim to a scheme, entrapment, having to put up a charade, being taunted, a spiritual group or organization is exposed as being a cult, a bad or lackluster performance, being cruelly mocked, drowning, sustaining an injury in or around water, your cover is blown, attempting to remain in the background, being suckered into a bad deal, a bad or disturbing dream. Uranus and Capricorn squaring Chiron and Aries. Keep in mind that both Uranus and Neptune were retrograde, and that means that these transits are long in the making. Like they can basically hit up his chart 4 or 5 times in the course of about 2 years. So Uranus and Capricorn square Chiron and Aries, an unbelievable situation, an odd occurrence, being incredulous, an egregious offense, perversion, being shocked or dismayed as a result of what occurs, unforeseen obstacles arise, being insulted, a heartbreaking decision, heartache, being emotionally or physically wounded, expect the unexpected. Murphy's Law is in effect, so create a plan B and possibly C, an anomaly. Being weirded out by someone, being caught off guard, a period of uncertainty or insecurity, a tense situation, waiting on pins and needles, being neurotic, artifice, undesirable changes, the end of a friendship. Someone is being very rude or inconsiderate, undergoing a period of drastic change, attempting to buck the system, being a rebel or rebel rouser, refusing to put up with someone's ill treatment of you any longer. Someone is stepping on your toes, a gut-wrenching situation. Pluto in Scorpio, semi-square Pluto in Libra. This is corruption of the legal system, not being given a fair trial, ill-equipped legal team. And these parts are taken from my book in bold. Undergoing an assessment or evaluation, being compelled to make substantial changes, revocation of rights or privileges, coercion, throwing in the towel, purging that which is no longer of value or use to you, succumbing to outside pressure, extricating yourself from an undesirable situation, a time where much that occurs is beyond your control, subversion, detecting fraud or corruption, vandalism, being on the receiving end of someone's vindication, plotting, revenge, being uprooted. I think instead of vindication, I meant vindictiveness. Seeing your attempts as futile, being beset with grief or remorse, uncovering unsavory information about someone, a period of abstinence, time for a reevaluation. So his nodal return was approaching. So the nodal return can bring forth a remittance of karmic debt via the South Node, hard lessons via the North Node. So here's the transits on August 11th, 2011. And this is dealing with the plea deal. Transiting Jupiter in Taurus, sextile Jupiter in Pisces. So it was a really good day for him. Developing a wider perspective, experiencing a significant increase in confidence and optimism, activities that lead to self-improvement, winning, being in a superior position, the achievement of an aspiration, an opportunity to expand beyond your current reach, a successful outcome to a long ordeal, benefiting from keen intuition, striking while the iron is hot, being on top of your game, making great strides or progress, seeing the world, graduation day, getting a leg up, reaching a milestone, covering much ground, going on a journey or quest, strengthening your faith, seeing a clear path to the achievement of your goal, being proven right, a major development, the ability to overcome a major obstacle, meeting someone of major importance or influence, opportunity knocks, successful self-promotion, conquest, being in an unsellable position, getting free reign, seeing the payoff to persistence. That whole part about meeting someone of major importance, I'm sure he met with some celebrities once he got out of prison. Transiting Mercury in Leo, trine Venus in Sagittarius. Fruitful communication, diplomacy goes a long way. Creative writing comes easy. Good news regarding money, returning a favor, paying it forward, a random act of kindness, being gracious or merciful, an act of generosity, expressing gratitude, giving thanks, receiving a beauty treatment. I would be surprised if he went to the barbershop once he got out. Being in a beautiful environment or lush surroundings, an enjoyable outing, enjoying nature. I'm sure he was after he got out of prison. Taking the long scenic route, a beautiful vista, kind or loving words are spoken, being a peacemaker or mediator, receiving acclaim or adoration, positive social interaction, receiving news of a positive change makes you feel more secure, being cooperative pays off, being thoughtful, making someone's day brighter. Transiting North Node conjoined to the sun in Sagittarius. That's basically his moment of glory, his freedom. He gets the get out of jail free card. Major themes of the sun sign and house are augmented or more pronounced. Freedom, justice is served. Being in the spotlight, a major event that is aligned with your purpose, developing a new sense of purpose, a significant event involving a child, increased confidence, realization, a life-altering experience. More focus is placed on your relationship with your father. Now, that might not apply to him, but receiving a lot of attention or praise, meeting a man of significance, a change in your level of vitality, an increase in your motivation to succeed, winning. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now, that's really dealing with that Alfred plea deal, because it basically was a deal, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, they still had to plead guilty, even though they were asserting their innocence, because they were basically saying, oh, yeah, they had enough evidence to convict them or whatever, which was crazy. But anyway, you got to do what you got to do. Your number comes up, a rare occasion, a once in a lifetime blue moon event, an opportunity of a lifetime. So again, here he is right here. So people could judge him right here and be like, oh yeah, look at him, he's satanic. But he got the symbol right here. He got the I Ching hexagram on his forearm. He got the Egyptian Eye of Horus. That just means he is an occultist. He's a mystic. Doesn't equate to Satanism. I don't see no Baphomets on him. Transiting North Node in Sagittarius, trine Chiron in Aries. Being viewed as exceptional, an exemption, winning an award, breaking the mold, a rare occurrence, a wonderful surprise, a chance to make a lasting impression, a good or better alternative, serendipity, seeing is believing, being amazed or enthralled, being in your element, amazing yourself, seeing a medical specialist. I don't know if he went to the doctor after he got out, but I wouldn't be surprised. Seeing a holistic health practitioner, I definitely wouldn't be surprised with that, because Sagittarius rules holism or holistic things. Receiving flashes of insight, encountering a unicorn, so to speak, a unique event, a theme party, garnering special favor with someone, becoming more of a maverick. Here he is holding up the sun card. I love this picture right here because I'm like, wow, that's so dope. So the sun was in trine with his son when he was released. So sun in Leo trine sun in Sagittarius. That might be why he's holding up the sun card, because he knew that on the day he was released, the sun was in trine with his son. Being able to get plenty done without outside interference, making a decision that will positively impact the immediate future, ability to be self-contained or self-sustaining, ability to take a time out to reflect. You are at a crossroads of space and opportunity, a chance to take a new direction or act on new decisions. They are also beautiful. I can't decide. A choice between two positives. I don't want this to end. Don't rain on my parade. Stasis, achieving equilibrium, achieving harmony, the proper balance, being well insulated. Now, again, when I first heard about this story about the West Memphis 3 case, I automatically assumed that those 3 teenagers back then were guilty, that they did do a satanic ritual and all that type of stuff. But that was before I did extensive research on this case. So as I was watching the documentary Paradise Lost, I'm reading some of the comments, and several people are mentioning the name Terry Hobbs. And they're like, Terry Hobbs did it. I think Terry Hobbs did it. I think Terry Hobbs did it. And I'm like, who is this Terry Hobbs? So I had to go back and look at like the documentary closely. The crazy part was, before I started reading the comments, in that documentary, in the very beginning, they're interviewing some of the parents of the victims. And one of the mothers stood out in particular, and other people in the comments section noticed this too. Basically, you know how they'll have a reporter preparing the person for the interview before the cameras start rolling? Well, they had that part recorded before they went live, and she was laughing and joking around. And this was shortly after the murders. And I was like, that's an unusual response for a mother that just lost her little 8-year-old boy. I just thought that was strange. And then come to find out that was Stephen Branch's mother, who's married to Terry Hobbs. So Terry Hobbs is the stepfather of one of the little boys that was murdered, Stephen Branch. So I started to look into Terry Hobbs. And when I looked at Terry Hobbs' chart, I was like, oh shit. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was just like, whoa. These people that are saying that Terry Hobbs did it could be telling the truth. I mean, could be on to something. And remember, I told you about aspects in a person's chart that can show that they murder a child, and he has some of those aspects. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, that same aspect can deal with a murdered child, and he did lose a child, his stepson, through murder. But you can also look at it from this angle as well. So upon doing my research, I stumbled upon this website that had these theories about what could have possibly happened, like who really killed those boys. So I'm going to pull up the article actually and read it real quick because it's deep. And okay, so the thing was, once I was like, okay, Terry probably did it, I was still trying to figure out the motive. I was like, well, was he the Satanist and stuff? Because I'm still thinking that maybe it was a satanic ritual. But then when I stumbled upon this website and saw this story, and it's speculation, but there's actual accounts from Stephen Branch's aunts about a certain situation, which I'm going to get into in a minute. Okay, I think this is the link right here. Okay. Now, like I said, some of this is speculation, but it's very telling to me. So this website is famoustrials.com, and it's basically talking about who killed the three boys. Now, there was a weird situation about this man at the Bojangles restaurant, this black man that was covered in blood. And people are saying maybe this was the guy that did it. And it was weird because the police never followed up on this situation. But I don't believe it was this black man that did it. But basically, it says at 8:40 p.m. on May 5th, 1993, the West Memphis Police Department received a call that a bleeding black man had entered the Bojangles restaurant located near where the three bodies were eventually discovered, about 30 minutes earlier, and gone into the women's restroom. Officer Regina Meek arrives on the scene at 8:50 and questioned Marty King, the restaurant's manager, through the drive-through window. King reported that the man with muddy feet, wearing a white cap, black pants, and a blue shirt, had blood on his face and arm and appeared mentally disoriented, but had left the restaurant a few minutes before the officer arrived. When employees entered the women's restroom, they discovered blood smeared on the wall. The officer leaves the premises at 9 without ever setting foot inside the restaurant. The next day, Detective Byrne Ridge and Sergeant Mike Allen returned to Bojangles to collect the blood scrapings from the restroom wall. Unfortunately, the scrapings were never sent to the crime lab to be analyzed and were later reported lost. No additional interviews were ever conducted with Bojangles employees about the incident. In the Echols Baldwin murder trial, prosecutor John Fogelman argued that it was a complete absurdity to think that criminals who took pains to hide bodies, clothing, and bicycles would immediately thereafter go into a public place all covered in blood. Critics of the Bojangles theory also point out that the bleeding man reportedly wore a cast on one arm, a fact that they say would have made it very difficult to tie up and murder the three boys. So I don't believe that guy did it either. That looked like it was some isolated incident. But about this. So Terry Hobbs, stepfather of victim Stephen Branch, and his friend David Jacoby, with the assistance of two teenagers. So affidavits of Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy. So years later, these two guys came forward with affidavits basically implicating Terry Hobbs in the killings. So A documentary film about the 1993 killings west of Memphis, a film paid for and produced by well-known director Peter Jackson, suggests, without making a direct accusation, that Terry Hobbs, stepfather of victim Stevie Branch, participated in the murder of the three boys. The filmmakers note that the most significant piece of DNA evidence found at the crime scene, DNA in a hair found in one of the shoelaces used to tie up the boys, matched the DNA of Terry Hobbs, as well as 1.5% of the population. A second hair found on a tree stump near where the bodies were found matched that of David Jacoby, a friend of Terry Hobbs, whom Hobbs visited roughly an hour before the boys disappeared. And this was the alibi, basically, that Hobbs gave. They also questioned the alibi given by Hobbs that he spent the evening of the murders with his friend David Jacoby. In the film, Jacoby doubts whether he spent as much time with Hobbs that night as Hobbs suggests. The filmmakers also stress that Terry Hobbs has a long history of abuse, including an admitted assault on his wife and accusations of child beating and assault on neighbors. An aunt of Stevie Branch, Judy Sadler, accuses Hobbs in the film of forcing his young son to watch him masturbate and of sexually molesting Stevie's sister, Amanda. Amanda incidentally says she cannot recall any sexual abuse by her stepfather. They also managed to find a neighbor who claimed to have seen Hobbs with the three boys on the night of the murder, something Hobbs strongly denied. To this mix of circumstantial evidence, the filmmakers add the fact that another of Stevie's aunts, Jo Lynn McGaughey, alleges she saw Terry Hobbs doing laundry the night of the murders, presumably to clean the mud off his shoes after killing the boys in the woods. And the fact that a prized pocket knife owned by Stevie, one he almost always carried with him, was later found among Terry Hobbs' possessions. Finally, and perhaps most damningly, the filmmakers produced three young men who now claim to have been told by a nephew of Terry Hobbs that the fact that Terry killed the three boys was a closely guarded family secret. In statements under oath, the three witnesses say that Michael Hobbs told them, "My uncle killed three boys in West Memphis." John Mark Byers, stepfather of Chris Byers, and initially the subject of considerable suspicion himself, is shown calling Terry Hobbs a baby killer outside an Arkansas courtroom. Terry Hobbs, however, was not without his defenders. Todd Moore, father of victim Michael Moore, found the evidence against Hobbs unpersuasive. He noted that his son spent a lot of time in the home of Terry Hobbs and could easily have picked up the hair, with DNA matching that of Terry Hobbs, found in his shoelaces on one of those occasions. Todd Moore asserted, "Terry Hobbs did not murder my son. No credible law enforcement official believed so." Other critics of the Hobbs as the murderer theory noted that the statements by the three young men 2 decades after the crime about the Hobbs family secret are 3 or 4 times removed from any original source and are far less probative than the secondhand testimony of 2 witnesses. In the Echols Baldwin trial, Hamish Mackenzie, writing in the Atlantic, was critical of the decision of filmmakers in west of Memphis to place the blame for the murders on Terry Hobbs, calling Jackson a self-appointed producer, prosecutor, and the charges made in the movie reckless. Of course, reckless doesn't mean wrong. In 2013, what seems likely to be close to the true story of the West Memphis murders finally emerged in separate affidavits signed by Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy. The level of detail and overall plausibility of the stories told in the affidavits made it seem highly credible, even if they do come from an admitted drug dealer and a convicted felon. On May 5, 1993, according to both Stewart and Guy, Terry Hobbs, David Jacoby, and 2 teenagers from a local trailer park, L.G. Hollingsworth and Buddy Lucas, showed up at his West Memphis home looking to buy some pot, which Stewart provided. While Stewart sold the 2 boys the pot, he noticed Hobbs and Jacoby kissing in a pickup truck across the street. According to Stewart, Hobbs was a bisexual with a preference for sex with young boys. Hobbs, he stated, had invited his own 10-year-old son, Bill, to pool parties, invitations which Stewart insisted his son declined. What happened after Stewart sold the pot on May 5th was told to Stewart by Buddy Lucas in April 1995. Getting back in the pickup, Hobbs, Jacoby, and the 2 boys drove around town, smoking pot and drinking whiskey before heading down a dirt road by the Blue Beacon Wood. At that point, according to Lucas' account, Terry Hobbs asked the two teenagers to get out and wrestle while he and Jacoby watched. That sounds very plausible. While Lucas does not specifically say that wrestling soon turned into sexual activity involving him, L.G. Hollingsworth, and the two men, Stewart has no doubt that is what happened, asserting that the lower head and shame evident on the boy's face as he told the story made it clear that there was more going on between the boys and the men than what Buddy had just told me. It was during this likely sexual activity that Chris Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch appeared on their bikes at the wrong place at the wrong time. Stewart says Lucas told him that Terry Hobbs screamed, "Get them little fuckers," while Jacoby beat one of the kids. Hobbs ordered Buddy and LG to pull off his pants. According to the Stewart affidavit, Mr. Hobbs walked over to the boy that Mr. Jacoby had been beating and repeatedly bit the boy's penis and scrotum, then cut the boy's genitals. Terry Hobbs then announced that the other two boys had to be killed because of what they had seen, and Hobbs and Jacoby proceeded to do just that. The boys' clothes and bodies were gathered and dragged to the water and their bikes thrown into the bayou. Shockingly, according to Stewart, when he tried to call West Memphis police investigator Bill Sanders to tell him the story he had heard from Buddy Lucas, Sanders never even bothered to return his phone calls. If this allegation is true, it certainly brings so readers can debate whether that decision was meant the continued incarceration of 3 almost certainly innocent young men for another 16 years, or the murders in the Blue Beacon Wood was the greater tragedy. Benny's Guy's affidavit tells a similar story. Guy stated that while Buddy, who Guy describes as pretty bad slow, was staying in his home in 1994, he confessed his involvement in the killings. Guy stated in his affidavit that L.G. Hollingsworth also confessed to participating in the murders while both were incarcerated in the Crittenden County Jail in 1995. Hollingsworth's confession adds a few new details to that of Buddy's. According to Guy's account of Hollingsworth's confession, Terry Hobbs became enraged after one of the boys began kicking him. Hobbs hit the boy in the head and shouted, "I'm going to teach your fucking ass." Hollingsworth said that he, Buddy, and the two older men all participated in beating the 3 8-year-old boys, and confirmed Buddy's account that Hobbs ordered the two teens to take the pants off the boys before cutting the genitals of one of them with a knife. Guy stated that he sent a detailed letter to prosecutor Scott Ellington in February 2012, describing the details of the two confessions, but that Ellington never responded. Now, there's some discrepancies with the nature of the genitals being cut. Now, one of the medical examiners was saying it looked like it was actually bites from snapping turtles. Like once their bodies was put into the creek, that the snapping turtles got to them. So I don't know if the part of where they're saying Terry Hobbs cut off the boy's penis is actually true. So that's to be investigated. I don't know for sure. But when you pull up Terry Hobbs' chart, if you know what to look for, a lot of this stuff does pan out like how this story is basically showing. So Terry Hobbs, his sun at 0 degrees Gemini, square Pluto at 29th degree Leo. Sun square Pluto can manifest as child murder, the killing of a child or children. Death surrounds him. I always say with Sun square Pluto, death surrounds the person, whether they're a killer or not. Murder of a child or children. Child abuse, including sexual. That's possible with Sun square Pluto. Hypersexual. Operating undercover, especially in terms of romantic/sexual affairs. Criminal tendencies. And he was locked up before he, was, and one time he actually snuck into his neighbor's house and started rubbing himself up against her like he was about to rape her, and because she fought him off, he left. But this is it seems like he's a depraved individual. Sun quincunx Neptune in Scorpio. This could be secret sexual encounters, hiding his true sexuality, being bisexual. One of Steve's Terry's stepson's aunt said that Terry forced Steve to watch him masturbate. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was really true. The sexual harassment of his neighbor. Represents story of Terry having the teenage boys wrestle to live out his sexual fantasy, the boys catching him in the act. And the sun in Gemini is representing the boys on the bikes. Can represent the bindings that were put on the boys as well. Keep in mind that Neptune in Scorpio is representing the swamp. And you know how they kept on saying the muddy water, the muddy swamp, the bayou? That's Neptune in Scorpio all day. Can represent the positioning of the bikes. Gemini rules bikes by the water. Sun in Gemini quincunx North Node at the 29th degree of Libra. You know that 29. I always tell you about that 29. It's no joke. That 29 can produce love triangles. It could produce interference from third parties. In his case, it was the kids coming on the scene, allegedly, while he's in the act of engaging in some, questionable behavior. The scuffle he got into with his brother-in-law. So a year after these murders, he shot his brother-in-law. Challenges with answering questions when being interviewed. Look at Terry right here. I forget what father this was, but Terry doesn't look very upset right here. Mercury in Taurus square Uranus in Leo. 8th degree of Leo in particular. Leo rules children, and those boys were 8 years old. Like I always say, that those degrees could deal with ages. So this can manifest as perverse thoughts about children, being disruptive, mentally unhinged, making the neighbor feel unsafe as a result of his invasion of her home, being startled or shocked by the presence of the boys. He panics when he is spotted by the children. And again, this is speculation. This is from that story that I just read, but it's matching up with what's in his chart. So this could be where he panics when he is spotted by children. Mercury in Taurus has him very concerned about appearing quote unquote normal. Also represents Terry's truck, because they were basically, those guys were wrestling outside of his truck. Terry's friend does not corroborate some of Terry's accounts of his whereabouts. Mars in Pisces, sesqui square Neptune in Scorpio. So that's Stephen Branch's mother, and she was the one that was giggling and stuff before the cameras started rolling, before they went live. And I thought that was very suspect. So I was wondering if she may have knew what really happened, and maybe she really didn't have attachment to that boy. I don't know. I'm not going to go too far into that, but I just thought that was kind of fishy. But what's crazy is after she divorced Terry, she came out and said she thought Terry killed those boys. Now, Mars and Pisces, this is one of the clinchers right here, which is why I have it bolded in red. The aspects I have bolded in red are like the smoking guns. Represents the hair found on one of the boys' shoelaces. Pisces rules shoes, Mars rules hair. Represents the hair found on one of the boys' shoelaces and how it matches Terry's hair in terms of genetic markers that pertain to a very small percentage of the population. Mind you, none of the West Memphis 3, Damien, Jessie, or James DNA was found at the site of the murders. Secret sexual desires and activities begin to get out of hand. He gets sloppy. Could represent the boy's shoes and the use of shoelaces to bind the boys up. Probably is haunted by murders through nightmares. He looks guilty as sin. Look at him. Mars in Pisces square Saturn and Sagittarius. This is him shooting his brother-in-law. Sagittarius rules in-laws. The truth comes out about Terry, especially in terms of the hair on the shoelace. A miscarriage of justice. Feeling restricted about sexuality due to religious beliefs. Remember, they're in the Bible Belt. And this is why I believe that the murder was pinned on those boys, the Memphis 3, because in the Bible Belt, especially back in the early 90s like that, people were still very much against LGBTQ individuals. But, that doesn't mean that there wasn't plenty of gay men there. They were hiding it. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the police force were bisexual too, secretly bisexual. They might have had some, little community going on. And for the truth to come out, like, oh, one of the fathers was bisexual and he was in the act of doing something. And next thing you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they would cover that up, simply because, again, that is not acceptable in the Bible Belt. And we're talking about, these are like those type of Americans that are very much about, this is, I'm a man type of stuff. Even though I like to get bent over, I'm a man. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason why there was this cover up. And Terry or his friend Jacoby might have knew somebody in the police force that was willing to overlook it. Challenges with being truthful about having sexual relations with men. Men that have Mars and Pisces, they could be sexually fluid, just put it out there. Lacking morality and a code of ethics, being plagued with guilt. Moon in Cancer, trine Neptune and Scorpio. The ability to maintain a dark secret, good at lying, can come across as convincing. Wife kept his secret, at least throughout the marriage, perhaps. That's speculation on my part. Easy to get drugs. Being a member of a secret society, Masons. Saturn in Sagittarius, sextile Chiron in Aquarius, having friends in high places, such as the chief of police, perhaps. Jupiter and North Node in Libra, trine Chiron in Aquarius, having friends in the legal system. The judge is on his side, perhaps. This is speculation. Fire grand trine in his chart involving Saturn, South Node, and Pluto, having the law on his side, can be representative of getting away with murdering children with Pluto in Leo. Uranus in Leo square Neptune in Scorpio, in conflict regarding secret sexual affair with friend. A group of children pose a threat to Terry's sexual secret. Seeing the boys sends Terry into desperation mode where he has to get rid of them. Because again, once the boys saw what was going on, again, this is allegedly, now the secret is out. Now something has to be done, because God forbid it comes out that Terry and these other guys are bisexual. Lacking compassion, putting children in the water. Again, remember that Neptune and Scorpio. Boys found in a muddy creek. Neptune and Scorpio is that muddy creek. You don't see Muddy Creek in Damien Echols' chart. A group of celebrities point the finger at Terry, resulting in a lawsuit with the Dixie Chicks singer. So the singer in the Dixie Chicks, she started to really assert that Terry probably killed those kids, and then Terry turned around and sued her, but they dismissed the case. Even that North Node conjoined to that Neptune in Scorpio, that could deal with where, he got this secret, this very dark secret, and there's a legal situation going on. There's a legal case going on. Venus in Aries, opposition Jupiter in Libra, having relationships with men outside of his marriage, facing a judge, being judged, shooting his brother-in-law, plenty of target practice, being in the courtroom during the trial, being interviewed, filing the lawsuit against the Dixie Chicks singer. Chiron in Aquarius, opposition Pluto in Leo, a dark corridor of death that involves a friend. Forbidden love, friendship becomes sexual, at odds with his sexuality. The boys coming upon Terry and his friends doing something strange. They stepped into that corridor, that dark corridor of death. The shocking truth comes out about Terry and the murder of the boys. A group places focus on Terry's involvement with the boys' murder. Internet posts and videos implicate Terry in the murders. An astrologer is pointing the finger at Terry being the murderer of those kids, with Aquarius ruling astrology. That's where I come in. So this opposition is making me think of the details of the boys' death and how they were found. So it says they had been stripped naked. That's the Aquarius part. And were hogtied with their own shoelaces, their right ankles tied to their right wrists behind their backs. The same with their left arms and legs. So the ankles being tied behind their back. So I'm just like, wow. Their clothing was found in the creek, some of it twisted around sticks that had been thrust into the muddy ditch bed. The clothing was mostly turned inside out. 2 pairs of the boys' underwear were never recovered. Christopher Byers had lacerations to various parts of his body and mutilation of his scrotum and penis. North Node conjoined to Bacchus. Bacchus is an asteroid that deals with addiction, but also orgies. So this could deal with a sex addiction in his case because it's in Scorpio at the 0 degree of Scorpio, mind you. So sex addiction. He could have been attending sex parties. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a whole community of down low men in West Memphis, Arkansas, and that's why they had to protect their own. You know how they say the old boys club, orgies. Jupiter contraparallel Degenerate can be representative of Terry being at the creek that day because Degenerate could deal with having to cross some water. Saturn parallel Folix, blowing the lid off of Terry's secret. And that's through the scientific test. Mars conjunct Proserpina, Chiron parallel Proserpina, kidnapping the boys because Proserpina deals with kidnapping, can also be indicative of rape that he committed at some point. I don't think they're saying that they didn't find. Matter of fact, I think they did say they found some traces of semen somewhere on the scene, but I don't think that that's what actually occurred that day. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's raped somebody else. North Node parallel Psyche, wounding people, stealing away in the night for secret sexual trysts. Venus conjunct Volcano, explosive temper directed at others. Jupiter conjunct Cletia, can represent tattling, spreading gossip, murder as a means of punishment. Sun conjunct Alcyone. Alcyone is a star that can manifest as homosexuality, disgrace, loss, sorrow, bereavement, trouble with women. Sun conjunct Pleiades. Homosexuality is another theme of this group of stars. Violence, accidents. Mercury conjunct Sheraton. Violence, danger, defeat, accidents, injury. Venus parallel Procyon. Violence, occult, disaster. Uranus conjunct Enceladus Australis. Mass murder, horrors. And you know, it only takes you to kill 3 people to be known as a mass murderer. Saturn conjunct Lasath and Shala. Danger, desperation, immorality, malevolence, acids, poisons, captive. He held those boys captive before he killed them. Allegedly. I'm not saying that that's definitely what happened, but the finger is pointing to him. Catastrophe, accidents. So when you look at the synastry between Hobbs and the boys versus Damien and the boys, to me, it becomes even clearer of who is the culprit. So there's a Yod aspect pattern that is formed through a synastry between Hobbs and each of the boys. Hobbs' sun, quincunxter, Neptune, and Pluto. Perfect representation of the boys coming upon Terry and his friends doing something they weren't supposed to see. My bad. I put were. It's supposed to be weren't. Let me fix that right there. Hold on. Terry reacts by making the boys disappear, allegedly. Hobbs' sun is activating fear and death for the boys. Neptune is also representing the muddy creek, drowning. Hobbs, Pluto squaring Byers and Moore's North Node in Chiron and Gemini. The boys riding their bikes and encountering Hobbs engaged in a sexual or taboo act. Hobbs has to cover his tracks so the boys will keep quiet about what they saw. Keep quiet for good. Hobbs' North Node can join the Byers and Moore's Pluto. 29th degree, serious conflict, interference from third parties, high pressure situation. Murder theme is strong in terms of Hobbs' destiny and his involvement with the boys. Exposed, the boys had too much power over him once they became aware of his love triangle, which resulted in Hobbs' decision to delete them. Uranus and Leo squaring Bayer and Moore's Saturn and Scorpio represents Hobbs' friend Jacoby and how the boys interrupted their romantic tryst. A shocking sexual experience for the boys. Hobbs' friend could have inflicted most of the damage. Hobbs' Neptune and Scorpio square branches Mars and Aquarius. Branch finding Hobbs in a sexually compromising position, finds out his secret, shock, surprise, perversion, nudity with Mars and Aquarius. The aunt's story of sexual corruption, abuse of Branch via masturbation can be substantiated through this aspect. Remember, Steve Branch was the stepson of Terry Hobbs. Drowning Branch in the muddy creek, stripping him of his clothes. Hobbs' Pluto square Branch's Mars. This is a sexual abuse aspect that substantiates the aunt's claims. Also represents Branch finding Hobbs in that sexually compromising position. This is potentially a murder aspect. Hobbs' Uranus and Leo opposition Branch's Mars and Aquarius. Branch and his friends finding Hobbs with his friend / lover most likely did not get along with each other. So I'm thinking that because of this opposition, Terry Hobbs did not treat his stepson well at all. And of course he didn't if he's having him watch him while he masturbates, which is totally egregious. But again, that's allegedly. Most likely did not get along with each other. Hobbs was indifferent, detached when it came to his stepson. Could have viewed him being more in a way. Viewed him as being more in the way or a threat to his liberties. Hobbs was like a dictator, tyrant towards him. Hobbs chose his friend / lover over his stepson. Hobbs' Chiron in Aquarius square Branches Saturn and Scorpio. Chiron at the 22nd degree. 22nd degree can be sudden death, kill or be killed. Could represent a fatal wound from Hobbs' friend Jacoby. Hobbs' Mars sesqui square Branches Pluto. Branch exposing Hobbs. Sexual assault aspect, extreme harm, physical abuse. So let's get into some of the transits that Hobbs was dealing with on the day of the murders. So transiting Mars and Leo was forming a sesqui square with his Mars and Pisces. So from my book, I have being hassled, harassed, but this is basically the aspect that deals with the boys catching Terry Hobbs in the act of doing some secret sexual act, basically. Being harassed or hassle, interpersonal conflict, a lot of bickering back and forth, a competitive event that gets a little ugly or serious, that would be the wrestling. Things getting a little out of hand, a disagreeable or cantankerous person, being very defensive, fending off an aggressive person, scrambling to get work done, working hard to prove yourself worthy, struggling to be acknowledged, meeting a fierce contender, a delay, having to make other arrangements on a moment's notice, such as taking those boys out. Switching up the program or process makes things more complicated, causing a stir or commotion, dealing with an interference. Someone tries to throw a wrench in your game. In that case, it was the boys. A need to assert yourself, an obnoxious person, being amped up, an adrenaline pumping experience, a disturbance, frustration, anger, a petty beef, wrangling. Again, like those guys wrestling, pushing and shoving, an injury, escalation, fighting back, a need to stand up for yourself, refusing to back down, a person who's causing unnecessary stress or difficulty, tension builds, an ego-fueled tirade or disagreement, getting cut or burned, getting hit in the face, a head injury, a vigorous workout, overexertion, wild or rough sex, an awkward sexual experience, incongruence, a lack of cooperation, an inability to make amends, an undesirable or awkward situation, being fed up with someone, in this case, him being fed up with Stephen, and more so Stephen, because, you know, he had an attachment to him because that was his stepson. Being overwhelmed, keeping someone at a distance, being apathetic to someone's plight, expressing disinterest or displeasure, being annoyed, feeling cagey. Chiron and Leo, quincunx Mars, being strong-armed, coercion, being forced to get involved, off to a bad start, dealing with a tyrannical person or policy, something or someone is making it hard to forge ahead. So this could have been dealing with, you know, the investigation when he was being questioned, some of it, a head injury, an injury to the face, being subdued, a weird or unsettling sexual experience, being finagled, your actions are thwarted, getting bent out of shape, a knee-jerk reaction, which can explain, you know, why he went off when those boys caught him, allegedly. Operating at a lower capacity, undergoing an identity crisis, feeling powerless in the face of enforced change, being disruptive, acting out, being rubbed the wrong way, experiencing severe pain or discomfort, agony, frustration. This is another one that was a clincher. Saturn in Aquarius opposing Pluto in Leo, 29th degree. So the severing of a bond, a fated circumstance triggers an emotional outburst. Again, this is taken from my book, so it's more so generalized, but a lot of this applies. Coming to terms with your own inevitable demise, but in this case, it could have been his stepson's demise. Being forced to relinquish some of your power, being rejected, the end of a phase of your life, being subjected to an extensive background check or investigation, a run-in with the authorities, being forced to give up some of what you have, feeling cornered, suspension, termination, a change in your level of sexual activity, a shutdown, dispossession, public exposure, indecent exposure. Uranus was squaring his Jupiter, a reunion that does not produce welcoming feelings. So that's basically the boys coming upon him, allegedly. An unexpected change brings a test of faith. A friend puts your generosity to the test. Encountering a major hurdle or roadblock, a major upset, upheaval, not having enough space. An ethical or moral dilemma involving a friend. A major shakeup, having to travel on a moment's notice, a friend goes too far. A change in terms of your level of freedom, a change in your belief or philosophy, taking objection to the way you're being treated, a strike or protest. And there was like protests calling for, them to find the killers. Your rights are being trampled upon, being freaked out and outraged. A process comes to a grinding halt, such as him being caught in the process of having sex. A change in the rate of growth or development, rebelling against a moral obligation, interruption of a program, an unexpected turn of events, an unfavorable turn of fortune. Neptune squaring his Jupiter, not getting your wish. Freedom is curtailed, a surreal experience, getting lost in fantasy. Being under an illusion, passivity, and addiction gets out of hand. In his case, the sex addiction. Having unrealistic expectations, detecting insincerity, ennui, fatigue, being disillusioned, being heavily inebriated. I wouldn't be surprised if he got shit-faced drunk that night to try to cover up the guilt. Tremendous sorrow, being plagued with guilt, regret, being burdened, lies, deception, embarrassment, humiliation, being lost, outlandish claims, a secret is revealed, attempts to hide the truth, wanting interest, dropping out, losing sight of what really matters. An unethical decision leads to negative repercussions, giving up, playing the role of the victim, water damage, a flood, being full of self-pity. So the water part, again, this could deal with the situation where he was by the water. Saturn sextile Aries South Node, trine Libra North Node, a startling revelation, dodging a bullet, accomplishing the seemingly impossible, a flash of insight, the blinders are removed, a successful alternative, in his case, basically him being able to get away with this murder, allegedly. Out of the box solutions, bucking the system, shattering false beliefs or misconceptions, calling someone's bluff, performing magic, a very rare experience, extraordinary circumstances, special perks or privileges handed out by the police force, perhaps, being unconventional, a surreal time, seeing a situation in a new light, doing the unexpected, being exceptional, being the exception to the rule, an unexpected gain, joining a special group, organization, or club, a breakthrough, a big debut, making a major impact, a sudden release, becoming more influential, which, you started seeing him on the TV news reports, a sudden rise in popularity, gaining a cult-like following, a paradigm shift, the realization of a goal or ambition, a very pivotal period. So as you can see, a lot of these entries does apply, some of them not so much, but a lot of it does. Jupiter in Libra was making a quincunx with his Mercury, having your hands full, could have been full with the bodies of the boys, a hectic day, a day of heavy writing or communicating, being thrown to the wolves, a need to complete a lot of paperwork or extensive application. That could have been when he was at the police station, being grilled, a long questionnaire, a long car ride, car trouble or car accident, walking a long distance, carrying a full load, being overwhelmed. I'm sure he was that day, receiving a lot of messages or phone calls, attempting to assemble a lot of components, a loudmouth, being berated, a formidable task, a tall order, running out of materials, which can explain why the shoelaces were used, a long conversation, taking on too much, overextending yourself, a schedule conflict, like where his alibi wasn't matching up with his friends, too many demands, a very long speech or lecture, too many cooks spoil the soup, being tongue-tied, cat got your tongue, wishing you could take back what was said, a legal deposition, a crowded area, receiving a lot of flack, receiving backlash, being overwrought with concern, a very stressful situation, added stress, having too much on your mind, overthinking, overanalyzing, a very loquacious person, being stretched thin. Now, this part is interesting. Around 6:35 p.m., neighbors reported that they saw Terry calling out for the boys to come home. He denies this, but the transiting ascendant was conjoined to his Neptune in Scorpio at that time. And again, neighbors said they saw Hobbs calling the boys to come home around 6:30 p.m. So him denying it, I strongly believe he's lying. And I do believe that he was seen with those boys. And this transit right here shows that, basically. So that concludes my reading on the West Memphis 3. Thank you so much, Jane, for sponsoring this case study. I spent like a good 2 weeks researching this story, and I wanted to make sure that I understood it because it is a bit convoluted. There's a lot of details to this story, and there's misconceptions, and there's just it was just a lot, and it was heavy. It was crazy, and I was just like, wow. So it really, again, it was an eye opener because I was biased just simply looking at how Damien Echols looks, even how he looks today. And I was like, yeah, he did that. And again, with him being associated with Johnny Depp and all that. But I honestly believe that he did not kill those kids, as well as Jason Baldwin and Jessie Misskelley. I believe that they were framed, they were set up. And yeah, I'm just glad that they have their freedom now. So yeah, thank you so much for sponsoring this case study. If anybody would like to sponsor a case study, send me an email, write sponsored case study in the subject line. My email is going to be in the description section of this video. And if you would like a reading, you could go to my website. That link is in the description section. Stay tuned for more videos. Peace, many blessings.